Our planet is in crisis.
And we're already experiencing the effects of climate breakdown.
Tackling emissions from transport is vital
if we're to create a cleaner, greener future.
We need to come together across the globe to implement genuine, sustainable change.
We're on a mission to use the platform of Formula E
to accelerate the adoption of renewable energy and e-mobility
in order to save our natural world.
Together, we can energize the race
against
climate change.
2021 is vital for our planet. It must be the year we get the world on track to tackle the climate crisis, because time is running out. In 2015, the countries of the world signed the Paris Agreement and committed to limit the rise in global temperatures to well below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees, because the science shows that would avoid the worst effects of climate change. To keep that ambition alive, we must halve global emissions by 2030, and that means taking action now. So COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference that we are hosting in Glasgow in November, must be the moment that every country and every part of society embraces their responsibility to protect our precious planet and put the world on a path to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to keep 1.5 alive. To achieve this, COP26 needs to signal the end of polluting vehicles. We want all countries to set a date as to when they will end their sale once and for all, as we have here in the UK, committing to end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. So we're delighted to have Envision Virgin Racing as a Together for Our Planet partner. Together for Our Planet is the climate campaign that we are running here in the United Kingdom to build the momentum ahead of COP26 and showcase the fantastic actions being taken on climate change across the country by schools, by families who are going one step greener, and of course by businesses. All these groups have a role to play in tackling the crisis, not only in reducing emissions, but in inspiring others and in making clear to governments that we are hungry for action on climate change, that we support big, bold, ambitious steps. That is essential to creating the conditions that governments need to act. So it's absolutely fantastic to see Envision Virgin Racing using its platforms to engage and inspire and bringing together leaders to discuss solutions and explore how businesses can use their voices for good. In this year, the year of COP26, this has never been more important. So thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I wish you the very best for your panel discussions. Thank you.
I'm Gemma Chandler, and we're coming to you from Envision Virgin Racing's headquarters at Silverstone. We're thrilled you could join us today to deep dive into a jam-packed set of panels from some of the most forward-thinking people on the planet. We'll be discussing crucial climate topics and unpacking exciting solutions for a cleaner, greener world. Envision Virgin Racing is a Formula E team and arguably the planet's favourite sports team. They exist to energise the race against climate change by accelerating the transition to clean, secure and affordable renewable energy and mass adoption of e-mobility. And we think you'll agree their mission has never been more important. There's no doubt there's a hugely positive movement happening around the world right now, but we also know that our planet is in a fragile place. From floods to fires, we're already experiencing the effects of runaway climate change. Yet today, we'll also explore what we need to do to champion a better future. Transportation is one of the key solutions we need to solve fast, and a transition to renewable energy and zero-emission vehicles is one of the best ways we can create a cleaner world and show the momentum humans can have in times of crisis. Over the next 90 minutes or so, we'll have 4 panel discussions which will feature the likes of Dr. Jane Goodall, Robert Llewellyn and Amy Vitale. And as always, we'll be getting social throughout the sessions, so get involved by using the hashtag #RaceAgainstClimateChange. Using your voice to support this movement is one of the best ways we can inspire action on climate change together, and it's you, our viewers, who are the real change makers. From myself and the whole Envision Virgin Racing team, thank you for supporting this event and our collective mission to tackle climate change. So without further ado, let's head over to the brilliant David Garrido for our first panel, which explores the electric future. From soaring emissions to global air pollution, road transport is devastating our planet. This panel will discuss the opportunities of electric vehicles, look at EV innovation and technology, and assess the power of electric mobility and its role in fighting climate breakdown.
Gemma, many thanks. Hello, everyone. Great to be here for what we hope will be a super impactful event. I really sense we're going to get some critical insight on all of today's panels and plenty of take-homes as well. This first panel is immediately relatable. An electric future, very much at the heart of what Envision Virgin Racing stands for, especially as they are driving the mass adoption of e-mobility. So let's welcome our first set of fantastic panelists for our session entitled, quite simply, The Future is Electric. I doubt that any of them would doubt that. Johan Rockstrom is a professor in Earth Systems Science who specialises in water resources and global sustainability. We also have with us Robert Llewellyn, whose YouTube show Fully Charged investigates the rapid development of EVs and alternative energy sources. And we also have Sylvain Filippi, who is managing director of Envision Virgin Racing. Welcome to you all. Great to have you with us. Sylvain, to start off with you, for Envision Virgin Racing, you are a strong team in Formula E, already 11 of individual race victories and plenty of podiums, but it's not just about winning, is it? I mean, as I mentioned, it's a bigger mission to accelerate the transition to renewable and sustainable mobility. So how would you say that the platform of Formula E is helping achieve that?
Could be a very long answer, but the short answer is we're not reinventing the wheel here. We just want to use the power of sport to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles and e-mobility, and mostly by doing two things: working on the technology itself and using the incredible engineering resources we have in motorsport to improve the technology of electric cars, and secondly, using the power of sport as a media platform to basically reach and engage a very high number of people. And get them interested, inspired, and getting them passionate about the sport and electric cars. And all of this together, hopefully, will have a positive impact.
Well, thank you for setting the scene there, Sylvain. Johan, there is an urgency here, though, isn't there? And your work suggests that we are alarmingly close to many tipping points. Some of them actually we've surpassed, haven't we? But when we're talking about boundaries and breaking them, how much time do we have left, would you say, until we reach a point of no return? And I suppose we've got lots of different areas we're talking about, be it climate or biodiversity or whatever else.
And let me say that, I mean, scientifically, we've come to a point of planetary emergency. We have reached what I define as the decisive decade for humanity's future on Earth. And before I kind of spell out what that entails, let me just connect to Sylvain immediately to say that urgency is exactly why I, as an academic, am, if possible, almost equally passionate as Sylvain on Formula E, because showing that sustainability is the pathway to something as modern, technology advanced as Formula E is one way, perhaps even the most decisive and impactful way, of communicating that we are on a new exponential transformative journey towards a safe operating space on Earth. And the risks that we scientifically are assessing are quite daunting. I mean, we quite recently did the mapping of the tipping points that we are at risk of crossing that could lead to irreversible, not only damage, but even self-reinforcing warming that would push the whole planet away from a manageable state. And we show that 9 out of the 15 climate regulating systems, I mean, we're talking about the Greenland ice sheet, the Amazon rainforest, the big overturning of heat in the oceans, 9 of the known 15 are showing signs of approaching tipping points. So yes, David, we are at a point of emergency and we need to rapidly transition towards a safe future.
So genuinely, how much does road transport have to answer for here?
It is like the very artery, kind of the fundamental bloodstream of our modern society. Mobility runs the world economy. So getting off fossil fuels on road transport, on heavy vehicles, on all forms of mobility is probably the first step for all citizens in the world to recognize that now we are on a system shift towards a decarbonized lifestyle. So it also has this psychological impact of enabling the whole society to transition into a sustainable future.
Okay, so that's a pretty stark landscape to sort of contextualize this discussion, but we're really here to talk about the future, aren't we, and how we can alleviate this situation and maybe turn it around. And Robert, if I'd like to bring you in here, I mean, EVs are on the rise. Recent studies are predicting that they'll make up more than 50% of new car sales by 2040. But how long do you think it will take to reach kind of critical mass adoption of EVs?
I mean, it's dependent on, obviously, on many things, but one of the crucial areas that I see really rapid growth and change at the moment is in fleets. So it's not in privately owned cars. It's in fleets, big companies, well-known brands who have a vehicle fleet have gone literally in the last year have gone, why are we using diesel? And they're stopping using diesel and they are adopting electric vehicles, and the new range of electric delivery vans in particular is a very good one. And there's two aspects to this that I think are critically important. One, yes, they're enormously cleaner. The companies that run them, they run spreadsheets. They see how much they cost. They see how much money they actually save in running costs. This is not just fueling them, but maintenance. They're much cheaper vehicles to run. This is a really critical argument when people worry about range. They never discuss that the vast amounts of money they spend buying fuel that we have to import from other countries and maintaining the vehicles, because internal combustion engines are by definition unreliable. They break down, they wear out, they need replacement parts all the time. They're expensive things to have. And therefore, the arguments now are coming through much stronger, that more and more people are understanding that it is not just about range, because we never talked about range when we had petrol and diesel cars, and yet loads of people ran out of petrol and diesel every day. But the critical one, just really want to make this point, is that the things that we're beginning to see now are large fleets of vehicles, and we're talking hundreds of vehicles that are plugged in at their depots to either charge, but this is most critically important, discharge. And this suddenly becomes a completely different picture. The vehicles that we all use at the moment, we don't use very often. If you own a car now, you're using it about 5% of the time you own it, which is utterly ridiculous. And if you can use that car in another way, i.e. as a battery for your home, as a battery for your street, as a battery for the grid in general, when you're not using it, and we're not talking filling it up and draining it and filling it, we're talking a tiny amount from each battery. But the amalgamated impact of those, what would eventually be millions of batteries, will be a complete change in the way we produce and consume energy.
And in terms of trying to speed up that transition, well, this is where Formula E can absolutely play a role with technology. Sylvain, we often talk in motorsport about track to road, don't we? About being the most exacting, demanding test bed, a motorsport, a racetrack. Tell us how Formula E is helping that trickle down and accelerating that transition.
Sure. It will be hard to keep it a short answer because there's a lot, but I'll do my best. So I'll just give you a few examples. So it's as I said, the two pillars of Formula E. The first one is technology. So there are a few very simple examples. Up to now, all the electric cars on the roads were at an architecture around 300, 400 volts, pretty much, which in itself doesn't mean much. When we started Formula E and up to now, we've doubled that. So our race cars run at 800 to 900 volt architecture. Doesn't mean much to most people, but in reality, what it means is that, again, we started the supply chain here. There was no supply chain for components, motors, inverters, all the bits you need to make a car that was operating safely at that voltage. It now exists, and we've proven through 5-6 years of racing that it's not only reliable but safe also, because we've had many accidents in racing, as you can imagine. And the key benefits are the fact that when you run a high voltage architecture, you create a much more efficient powertrain. An electric car is already 3 times more efficient than an internal combustion engine car anyway, but the higher the voltage, in simple terms, even the higher the efficiency of the car, which for a race car means it goes faster. For a road car, it means it goes for a longer distance for the same amount of energy. That's the beauty of track to road in Formula E. In other motorsports, sometimes there's a bit of difference between what makes a race car go faster is not necessarily good for a road car. Informally, we're perfectly aligned. Every technology advancement we do in terms of efficiency makes the race car go faster and makes the road cars either go faster or longer for the same amount of energy. So that's the beauty of it. So higher efficiency and critically faster charging. So basically, if you double the amount of voltage, you can, all things being equal, charge twice as fast, creating less heat, which was the main problem, and so on. And these are the key enablers of mass mobility, of mass adoption of electric cars. 300 plus mile range, and if you can stop 20 minutes to charge 0 to 80% your battery every 300 miles, I don't know many people that can drive that long anyway without stopping. So that's the tipping point in terms of technology.
Yeah, well, tech will show us the way, and it's not just changing; it's changing quicker and quicker. And I wonder, Robert, I mean, you have a very keen eye in this space overall. What recent developments in EV have got you feeling really excited?
I mean, it certainly is charging speed, the proliferation of chargers that can charge at that speed. I mean, the first time I actually drove about 200 miles when the first one was installed to go and see it, because it was an oddity. Now they're becoming very common. And I think all those things are critically important for as a general educational piece, that people who, if you don't drive an electric car, you don't see chargers. So your natural assumption is there's no infrastructure. That's what you say. And as soon as you do drive an electric car, you see chargers everywhere because you're looking for them. It's a very simple piece of psychology. But I think the speed of charging, the improvements in battery capacity and density in the last 10 years have been, really impressive. The first Formula E cars I saw when I went to one of the first races, the drivers had to have two cars and they had to jump out of one and get in another because one car couldn't do the whole race. Well, that's not the case anymore. Now, one car can do the whole race without any trouble at all.
I mean, Johan, what's the situation at the moment with the cost of alternative energy sources, particularly wind and solar? Is that specific barrier really starting to be removed now, and what sort of role do you think renewables will play going forward?
No, it is in many markets in the world already removed. It's not removed across the entire world, but I mean the latest estimate is that roughly 2/3 of markets around the world have reached grid parity between the renewable energy systems and coal in particular. So I think we can say that already today and in the next few years we should see a very rapid phase out of the dirtiest form of electricity, namely coal as a source of electricity. This is interesting because we're still not charging even a minimum price on the damage caused by fossil fuels on the atmosphere. So fossil fuels are not even able to compete with renewable energy systems, despite the fact that the planet is subsidizing the production of electricity through coal, oil, and natural gas. If we put the right price on carbon, even a $50 per ton of carbon dioxide, we immediately put renewable energy systems on a completely competitive advantage. So I think we've turned that corner. So now the question is no longer about kind of scaling the renewable energy systems in terms of price competitiveness. Now it's rather getting the financial institutions, the banks, the lending to really be continuing its exponential journey behind the offshore wind, the large-scale solar voltaics, the big transmission cables, the large infrastructure for charging, as Robert was pointing out. I mean, we need to get the big battery development, and we're seeing that happening. So over the last 15 years, solar and wind is doubling every 5 years globally. And if you just continue that pace into the future, we'll have 50% of global electricity from solar and wind when? By 2030. By 2030, in 9 years' time. Business as usual. Just continue at the pace of expansion as today. So, I mean, it's not a utopian future to think of electrifying global energy systems, but also in particular road transport.
I wonder whether you chime with that, Sylvain. I think it feels like that there is, against that start backdrop that Johan was painting right at the start, there are the solutions there. We are seeing the adoption of renewable energies much, much more frequently as you see that growth there. It's projected to increase as a global share to 30% in 2021. How hopeful are you? Do you share that optimism that Johan has just pointed out there?
Yeah, I do. By nature of my character, I guess, but also based on facts and what Johan said, but also what Robert touched on earlier, which is super important. And that's where we collectively, I think, get ridiculously excited, is that we then accelerate the good news and it becomes a virtuous cycle. Because as Robert said, millions of electric cars on the roads, it's going to be exponential through fleets and private ownership and so on. That becomes a gigantic storage for renewable energy. So not only you don't emit emissions where people live in cities and in front of schools and so on, you get rid of that problem, but also you create this gigantic energy storage for renewable energy. So you solve both problems, basically, as long as you create the connection, but that will happen. And that will make it a complete no-brainer, because once you have renewable energy that is actually cheaper, all things being equal, as well as a lot of electric cars on the road, then there will be no business case that justifies internal combustion engine anywhere. And I think we underestimate, us, but as a world, we underestimate how quickly that could happen.
That's an accurate read on the situation, I think, Sylvain. I think, but we're all aware that as you said, we all need to do our bit. And Johan, we know we need to decarbonize. There are global targets being set about net zero. Each country is starting to come into its own. You spoke to this point a bit earlier on. But are those ambitious enough? And if not, what more could we be doing to reduce emissions globally? And this is across the board in all sorts of different areas, not just e-mobility, not just renewables.
I mean, I think you're putting your finger on the big challenge here, that despite all the positives we've been discussing now, the overall aggregate development in the world is still following the wrong path. And Glasgow will be absolutely decisive. I mean, the number one step we need is that when 195 countries gather in Glasgow later this year for the big climate COP26 summit, we need to get the plans on the table where every country ratchets up, raises the ambition to align with science so that we can really follow a cutting emissions by half every decade pathway across all sectors. Because today we are still following a path that will take us to above 2.5, potentially even 3 degrees Celsius just in this century, which would be disastrous. But how to accomplish this is, I'm absolutely convinced that we need more regulatory decisions. We need to have the political leadership in the world recognize that this urgency means that we cannot just wait for open market incentives to kind of have their way. We need to set price on carbon globally. We need to set science-based targets that becomes climate laws, basically setting in legislation the pathways towards the pace of reductions, and not only to 2050 but to 2030, so that the pace is in time steps that are understandable for all sectors. So it's a lot that has to happen in the architecture of this transformation this year. And the good news is that the banking sector, the financial sector is stepping up behind this. They're starting to see the need to phase out investments in fossil fuels and invest in this transition. But everything goes together. Technology, policy, and finance needs to be playing in the same symphony. And that's the big ask for this year.
Would you say that actually it's given people just that little bit of time to engage and to maybe change that mindset rather than hinder the green recovery because of the lockdown?
I think public opinion has swung, and I think that has happened. I think you're right, and I think that was aided by the pandemic, bizarrely. That people are going, actually, everyone I speak to now goes, I love my old V8. I love the sound it makes. This is proper car nuts, but I know it's wrong. And interestingly, I spoke to two amazing African guys in Dakar, and they are they're starting an organization which is called Electric Vehicles for Africa, because they don't want diesel anymore, because they have to bring it in. And they've worked out they can make their own electricity and run their own cars. I think that this transition is going to happen globally and much faster than people think.
I think that's it, isn't it? That the change of mindset is such a key part of this. That then leads to a change of attitude, that leads to a change of behavior. And if that is already happening, however that's been brought upon us, well, that is a positive thing. And there's some amazing sort of encouraging anecdotes that you've brought us there. Thank you, Robert, for those. Gents, sadly, we haven't got any more time to go any deeper into this subject, but we do have time for a couple of audience questions. So audience at home has been watching this, and they've come up with a couple of questions. And first of all, Johan, I'd like to send this one to you. I think it's a really important question, actually, from Rebecca in London, who says, where do you think the communication of climate change has gone wrong over the years? How do we communicate the science in a way that cuts through? I suppose the tone of the conversation is important here, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Rebecca, you're posing a really important question, and I think we in the scientific community should actually be quite self-critical that we over the decades have been trying to communicate the science, but we've done two mistakes. I mean, mistake number one is that we've allowed not only climate science but actually all environmental sciences to be parked in the environmental parking lot as a kind of a side sector. And secondly, we have made it to a dichotomy between the modern world, let's say, humans, as being opposed to nature or the planet. So it's been like either we go economic development or we save the planet. And that has been a mistake of creating this kind of trench war between either you conserve and protect nature, and you can only do it by sacrificing a certain level of modern lifestyle. And that has been a big mistake. And of course, the other mistake that we've made is that we haven't been very good at communicating. We have been drowning in our complexity and uncertainty and statistics, and that is part of the academic nature. Today, we're seeing a completely different communication on climate, which again comes back to our conversation here, which we see more and more scientific evidence of the, let's say, the benefits we can, harvest in a transition, and that we are no longer talking about sacrifice. We're not longer talking about going backwards. We're going forward. We're taking the world to the next. It's kind of Earth 2.0 to decarbonize into the next modernity. And I think that's what has shifted just over the last, we're talking the last decade, and we're probably not even there yet fully, but we're starting to see a very different way of addressing this from the climate sciences.
Sylvain, can I ask you to come in on that point, please? Because I kind of feel that one of the important things here, when we bring this conversation full circle, we talk about Formula E and how it can appeal to a huge audience of fans, how to try and inspire them, how to try and encourage them, rather than being preachy. I mean, as I mentioned, the tone of conversation, what sport can really do here to have a real impact in this space and in this situation is really quite powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, the way I see it, we need two things. I think we absolutely need the scientific community to say, guys, this is real, this is important, this is raw data, this is happening, to make it to remove the debate around whether it's happening or not. And then the scientific community has done incredible progress on modeling and just data gathering and so on to make it absolutely clear. So we need that just to set the scene and say, we're not doing this because it's fun, we're doing it because it's absolutely necessary. Then once you've established that, then what are the solutions? And of course, my mindset is very much, let's be positive on exactly as Johan said. It's not one or the other. We can definitely make the world a better place, and renewable energy is a critical part of it, because we need energy to power everything we do, and mobility is a sub-segment of that. But we need technology, and we can aspire to a world that is better in every way, that is better for health, where the cars we drive are nicer and better, and they happen to be clean for the environment. We can have all of the above, and mostly through technology, and that's what I really like, and I think that's how we will inspire the next generations. Like, really great technology is like magic, right? Like, you go into an electric car that is the fastest car on the planet. It's better than everything else, and it makes no noise. It's like magic, and we will inspire all the future generations to work on that, become engineers, do whatever they need to do this, and the combination of all of that will trigger change. The only question is the timeline of it. That's what we keep talking about. If we had plenty of time, it would be easy peasy. But we don't have a lot of time. That's why we need to act really fast.
But that's why we're here, and that's why we're having these discussions, and that's where we're going to leave the conversation. Thank you so much to the audience for that last couple of questions, and do keep that conversation going using the hashtag Race Against Climate Change on social media. Thank you very much, Johan. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Sylvain, for your insights in this panel. It's been fantastic to have you with us. Gemma, back to you.
Earlier on today, I spoke to the brilliant environmental activist and geographer Hindu Umaru Ibrahim to discuss how Indigenous environmental knowledge can help us in the fight against climate change. Plus, she answered some extra special questions submitted by our curious National Geographic Kids readers. Hello and welcome to this special Q&A that's being hosted by National Geographic Kids magazine. I'm joined by the wonderful Hindu Umaru Ibrahim. Hindu, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Hindu Umaru Ibrahim. I'm from Chad, and I'm coming from an indigenous communities that are a nomadic pastoralists. So we are a cattle herders, and I am working with my community since I was young, and now working on environment protection. So that's who I am.
And Hindu, so your job title, I guess, is a climate and environmental activist. What exactly does that mean?
Right. So when we said I am a climate and environment activist, because I am working to fight climate change.
Can you tell us a bit more about what you're working on at the moment?
I am working to do two things. Firstly, it's working to protect the human rights of my community. Because if you don't have right to access water to drink, if you don't have rights to access the land where you can have your pastures, so your human right is not respected. So that's why I'm working for the human right. And at the same time, I cannot talk about human right as for the peoples without talking about environment right. Because when you have a water, you should give the respect to this water, to use it in a fair way, with the respectful, to share it with other peoples, and right to all the resources who are around the place we are living on it. Because of that, I create a solutions.
And you mentioned already that a lot of the work that you do is with Indigenous communities. Can you tell us what, for anybody that doesn't know, who Indigenous people are and why it's important that we hear their voices?
So, of course, Indigenous peoples are 5% of the world's populations. Indigenous peoples live across 7 regions. We call them 7 socio-cultural regions. It is not like the UN regions who have 5. For us, it is socio-cultural. We have Africa, Asia, Latin American and Caribbean. We have North America. We have Arctic. We have Pacific. And we have Western Europe and Russia. We are protecting 80% of the world biodiversity because we are around all those regions. We are around a different ecosystem, from the Sahara to all the savannas. We are from the glaciers to all the tropical forests, Amazon, Congo Basin. We are from the mountain. We are from the islands. So we are protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity.
And I think from what you said, it sounds like a lot of these Indigenous communities have knowledge about their particular environment that goes back generations and generations, but perhaps it hasn't been recorded or written down or shared with other countries. And that's part of the work that you're doing. Is that right?
Exactly. So one thing we have in common as Indigenous peoples, it is our attachment to our land and territories. You can have Indigenous peoples that coming from the Arctic or from the Pacific or from Asia or Africa or the Amazon. We have all in common the land right, who are collective land right. So we do not have individual or private land right. All is collective for us. And that's helped us to develop a lot of traditional knowledge in an oral way and based on our language. It is not in French or English or Arabic or any of these major languages. It is in our mother tongue. That's why it is also so important, those oral knowledge, to turn them into a written knowledge. And this is why I am using the science and I am using the traditional knowledge to put all what we have in a map.
Amazing, thank you. So I have some questions that have been sent in to us by National Geographic Kids readers. So the first one is from Jamie. Jamie is 13 and he's from Yorkshire. And his question for you is, how is climate change affecting people today?
Sure. Hi, Jamie. So climate change is affecting people everywhere now, but it is affecting more the most vulnerable countries, like the developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, or the most vulnerable communities, like indigenous peoples that live and depend from the nature. So when you have in the city of New York coming with the flood, or you come in the city of Paris coming with the flood, or you go to the California, you have fire every year, or you go to the Amazon, you have also fire, or you go to the Sahel regions, this is my region where I come from, you found a drought. So those are the impact of the climate change. So climate change do not have frontiers. It is impacting everyone, but it is impacting more those who are the most vulnerable, who are depending from the nature.
Final question then is from Max, and Max is 12 and he's from Hampshire. And he has said, do you think it's possible to save the world? And if so, how long do we have to do it?
Hi, Max. Let us be optimistic. Yes, it is possible to save the world. Don't worry about it at all. We will save the world. We need to do something special, all of us. We need to hold our government accountable. And as a young boy, you can just take information to your friends, to your family members, telling them that the politicians need to take a right decision to reduce the emission.
How can children get their voices heard with these sort of big, important members of parliament and governments?
I think children in developed world, and especially, like in US, in Europe, your children's voice is really matter because you already know how to use your speech at the school. You know how to gather together an association and talk to your elders, talk to your parents, because who is the decision makers? They are your parents.
Hindu, just a final question from me. It wouldn't be National Geographic Kids if I didn't ask, what's your favourite animal and why?
My favorite animals is a ocean turtle. And I love turtle. When I dive, I always looking to see one of the turtle. Even I do have one at the home. And of course, as a cattle herder, I can tell you I love cattle too.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was lovely to chat with you. And good luck with the project. The mapping project sounds amazing. And please keep in touch and let us know how it goes.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. It's really a great pleasure being with all the kids and also with the parents. And let's continue this discussion. I will update you on what I'm doing. And I will be happy to meet the kids and then also to chat with them again and again.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, let's move on to our second panel of the afternoon. Earlier, I caught up with the amazing Dr. Jane Goodall and Amy Vitale to discuss nature-based solutions to the climate crisis. Joining me to discuss this fascinating and hugely important topic are our two inspiring and knowledgeable panellists, Amy Vitale and Dr. Jane Goodall. I thought it would be nice if I could start by asking you to introduce yourselves to our viewers at home. So who you are, what you do, and also because I'm from National Geographic Kids, what your favourite animal is.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you who I am in a rather unusual way, like this. Chimpanzee paw. This is me, this is Jane. And Dr. Jane has loved animals since she was a tiny little girl, and she's now working as hard as she can to help people understand how important it is to protect animals and the natural world.
That's hard to follow. That's beautiful. I am a journalist. I started covering conflicts in the beginning of my career, and I realized pretty quickly that you can't talk about human suffering and the human condition without talking about the environment, and really realizing that link. And it really began when I started to work on the story about the last northern white rhinos, and it's led me down this path, just really feeling how interconnected every living creature is on the planet. And so now I'm a storyteller, and I use photography and films and writing to tell these stories. My favorite animal, that's like asking who's your favorite child? But I think I'll go, since we're going to talk about rewilding, I'll say the panda for now.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today. Dr. Goodall, perhaps I can start with you. So the buzzword when it comes to natural solutions to climate change is rewilding. Could you kindly explain for anyone who might not know at home what rewilding is, why we need it, and also the work that your charity, Roots and Shoots, is doing to contribute towards rewilding?
Well, rewilding is simply trying to bring back biodiversity into areas that we have previously destroyed. So in the UK, where I am now, it means that many farmers, especially those farming on land that isn't really suitable for farming, they're leaving the land. Sometimes they're planting indigenous trees. Animals tend to come back, birds, insects. Sometimes they're reintroduced. There's a terrific rewilding program right across the center of Europe with many countries involved. And this is making a real corridor of wilderness so that animals can move from place to place. And similar things are happening around the world. But for Roots and Shoots is a program of the Jane Goodall Institute, which is now in 30 countries. And our biggest effort for climate change and biodiversity is restoring and protecting forests in Africa.
And Jane, could you explain why we need rewilding?
Well, the trouble is that, as you said in the introduction, so many animals and plants are at risk of extinction. So many have gone. We're in the middle of the sixth great extinction. And we as human beings depend on the natural world. We're not, however much we may think that we can live without it, we can't. And we depend on the natural world. But what we depend on is healthy ecosystems. And an ecosystem is made up of the complex interrelationship of the animals and plants that live there. And I like to think of that as the tapestry of life. And every time a species goes extinct, it's like a thread being pulled from that tapestry. And as more and more species disappear, eventually that tapestry will hang in tatters, and that will be ecosystem collapse. And so rewilding is important because it's trying to bring back this mix of biodiversity that we have been responsible for harming so badly.
And it's probably worth mentioning as well that rewilding isn't just, as some people might think, the planting of trees. It can mean things like restoring wetlands, peatlands, marine environments as well, and also restoring individual species that we might have lost from certain habitats that, like you say, Jane, are one of those very important vital threads in the tapestry. So, Amy, as a filmmaker and photographer, you document and observe environmental stories, and you witness changes and challenges almost as they are happening. Could you tell us about some of the nature-focused climate solutions that you've documented through your work, and any that have particularly excited and inspired you?
Yes, well, Jane just hit on the most important part. I mean, when we talk about climate solutions, trees are a huge part of that. I would also say that, we think very often that that means planting trees, but I think that the most inspiring stories I've seen are these people that are great stewards of these landscapes. And I've seen landscapes over a few decades literally heal. I mean, even here in my backyard in Montana, we've seen that happen when they brought wolves back into this ecosystem. And then all these other species began to thrive. I've seen the same thing happen over and over again. And that is what drives me to keep finding these stories. It is possible, and we have to believe that. And I also think we have to learn from those people who are the best stewards of the land, and they have a lot to teach us. But I've seen a couple of the stories that have been incredibly inspiring are in northern Kenya, for example, where there was an ecosystem that just 30 years ago was completely destroyed. I mean, they poached out elephants and rhinos, and as a result, you started to realize that those were nature's great engineers, and all these other, the whole ecosystem began to collapse. As a result, the people began to suffer. When they realized that, and they started to take care of this landscape and make it a place that, animals are smart and they know when it's safe, and they began to return. They churned up the soil, trees began to grow again. I mean, it was just this amazing restoration project. And now flash forward 30 years later, all these animals that were gone, they're coming back. And it's really deeply inspiring to know that we just have to make, nature a priority, and we can change the trajectory that we're on right now.
From a slightly different perspective, when I got to Gombe in 1960, it was part of the great equatorial forest belt that stretched right across to the west coast of Africa. By the late 1980s, when I flew over in a small plane, it was shocking to see a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. I mean, I knew there was deforestation, but I hadn't realized how shocking it was. And it was when I was on a mission to find out why chimp numbers were decreasing across Africa and about the forests disappearing. And as I was learning about the problems faced by the chimps, I was learning about the problems faced by so many of the African people living in and around the forests. And the terrible poverty, the lack of good health and education, the degradation of the land. And it all came to a head when I flew over Gombe. And it hit me. If we can't help these people find ways of living, making a living without destroying the environment, then we can't save chimpanzees, forests, or anything else. And so JGI started a program which began in 1994 called Take Care Otokari. And it began with not a bunch of arrogant white people going into the 12 very poor villages around Gombe National Park. We selected a very small team of 7 local people. And they went into the villages and sat down and asked them, what do you think we could do to make your lives better? So the beginning was simply restoring fertility to overused farmland without chemicals, and improving health and education facilities, working with the local government that should have been doing it but wasn't. And so that's how we began, and it turned into such a holistic program with scholarships to keep girls in school, microcredit opportunities so that especially women can start their own environmentally sustainable businesses, water management programs. We provide family planning information, which is so eagerly received because people want to educate their children. They can't afford to educate the 8 or 10 they used to have. And also because of improved medical facilities in the villages, more babies live. So it becomes easier to make planned family. That little program is now in all 104 villages throughout chimp habitat, what's left in Tanzania. And the people have now become our partners in conservation because they understand that protecting the environment isn't just to protect wildlife, which is what they were told before by other NGOs. It's their own future as well.
It is quite typical of humans to kind of categorize these issues into to silo them into lots of different issues. But as you both say, all of these things are so interconnected. You can't really discuss one without it leading you to another. So it's fascinating, and the things that Roots and Shoots and the Jane Goodall Institute's been doing in that space sound amazing. I've got a question which I'm going to put to both of you. Jane, perhaps I can ask you first. So whether it's through sort of public speaking or for Amy, photography or film, both of you are kind of leading voices that communicate environmental issues as part of your work. Is there a particular way that you communicate these issues in a way that gets people to care and engage and ultimately to act?
The biggest group of people I ever spoke to was 75,000. And I never thought I could do anything like that. So it's books and it's telling stories. It's talking about things from first-hand experience. And that's why I've tried to go and learn about these different issues firsthand.
Yeah, and perhaps it is that it's just that emotional connection perhaps that people need that they haven't maybe had, especially if they've grown up somewhere that's very urban, for example, and not had much interaction with the natural world, but being able to hear about it from someone who can speak with emotion and compassion and all of that, probably, I imagine, really kind of strikes a nerve with those people. Amy, how about you? How do you kind of try to communicate those issues? Obviously, you have a slightly different method of storytelling through your photography and filmmaking, but how do you try to do that?
Well, first, I just want to remark that I think also, Jane, what's made you so powerful is that, you know, you're this one individual and look at the change you have created. And I think everybody needs to understand and believe in the power of, you know, sometimes it's just a small group of individuals, that Margaret Mead quote, you know, that it's only ever been a small group of individuals that have truly changed the world. And, you know, I think you've done more than speak. You've just galvanized people and created this institution. But I think, you know, for myself, it is again also about storytelling, and I use whatever medium I have, whether it's films or photography or writing. But it is just to, you know, I've had the privilege of witnessing not just the challenges and the things that really do drive you to despair, but then realizing you can't sit in that space of despair. You can't just react to it. You have to act on that. And that also, I truly believe that there is so much hope right now. We're at this moment right now where we do have to act. I mean, we don't have that much longer. This window is narrowing, but I do truly believe all these stories that for so long, when I first began my career, we were taught to just kind of talk about the problems without giving people a way forward. And I think it is essential that we cannot just talk about the challenges and leave it there. You must go out and seek the stories where, against all odds, people are doing the impossible. And they are understanding how interconnected this world is. And there is great hope. And you know, it's all these programs that Jane has been creating, but also I do believe it is about social justice and gender equality, and all of these issues come together. And by lifting one another up, I'm rambling on here, sorry, but it's just sort of seeing everything and realizing that we just all have to get out and use our voices and find out whatever skill it is that you have, or even if it's just loving something in your backyard and going out and using your voice or your vote. Everything matters.
And Amy, that leads in really nicely because you mentioned that feeling of despair sometimes in your line of work when you're, you know, documenting these stories that are heart-wrenching or, quite soul-destroying. So what is it that keeps you feeling hopeful about our future?
Because even in every single, some of the darkest sort of situations that I've seen and witnessed, I've also witnessed incredible resilience and remarkable change that is possible. You just have to believe it. I mean, I even think back to the past year and the pandemic. If nobody believed that they could create the vaccine, we wouldn't have had it. It's about making this an issue that is a priority for you, and realizing that you can't talk about the health of the planet. You're actually talking about your own health, the health of future generations. And when you make that connection and witness that it's possible, there is no other option. You just have to keep working on it. And I'll let Jane end this, but I feel like it's been really inspiring. I'm always left with a sense of hope in every single one of these stories. I've never left feeling, oh, it's hopeless.
As you say, Amy, mostly there is a reason for hope. There really is a reason for hope. And nature is so resilient. And the human brain is beginning to come up with technology to enable us to live in greater harmony. We're beginning to think what we can do in each day, the choices we make, how we can make things better for people, animals, and the environment. And the young people, when young people know the problem and we listen to them and we empower them to take action, they are changing the world as we speak. They're planting trees, they're teaching about animals and biodiversity. They're picking up trash. They're fighting plastic. They're fighting the oil palm plantations in Indonesia that are so threatening orangutans and gibbons. They're everywhere. And it's marvelous for me because I've always wanted to do everything. I want to do it all. I can't, obviously. But because Roots and Shoots is now spread so wide, there are groups of amazing young people tackling all the problems that I can't. So it's fabulous.
Well, that feels like quite a positive note to end on, and also a really great time to remind viewers that they can actually start their own rewilding efforts right now, simply by taking the Race Against Climate Change pledge, which they'll find on the Envision Virgin Racing website. And for every pledge made, a mangrove tree will be planted. So that's certainly something that's worth doing. You can start your rewilding project right away. Thank you so much to our amazing guests, Dr. Jane Goodall and Amy Vitale. Honestly, I could listen to the two of you talk for hours, but sadly we don't really have time for that, and that's all we've got time for on panel 2 today. But I hope that you all enjoyed watching at home and you enjoy the rest of the event. Goodbye. Well, I certainly wasn't expecting any of our panellists to introduce themselves in chimpanzee. Great to chat to Dr. Jane and Amy earlier. So we've heard about a handful of nature-based solutions, but what about the technological innovations which are helping safeguard our planet? As the race against climate change accelerates, how can technology speed up the race to net zero, and how can businesses drive genuine positive change? David will be discussing all of these pressing questions in our next panel.
Thank you very much indeed, Gemma. I think that really sets the scene beautifully for this next session, which is entitled No More Business as Usual, the Tech Driving Global Change. We are power-packed in this session as well. So let's get straight into it and to introduce our impressive trio of panelists. We have with us Lord Turner, who chairs the Energy Transitions Commission, a global coalition of major power and industrial companies, investors, NGOs and experts, working out achievable pathways to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius by 2040. We have Nigel Topping, who is the UN's high-level climate action champion for COP26. He was most recently CEO of We Mean Business, a coalition of businesses working to accelerate the transition to a zero-carbon economy. And prior to that, he was executive director of the Carbon Disclosure Project. And Tiger Thiagarajan, who is the president and CEO of Genpact, an industry leader who pioneered a new global business model and transformed the division of General Electric into Genpact, a global professional services firm delivering digital transformation solutions for clients. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being part of our event today. Tiger, if I could actually start off with you, because I mean, this is an ironic point to start off with, but historically, technology has actually led to the worsening of the climate breakdown, if you just look at how we actually discovered fossil fuels in the first place. But then, conversely, it's also enabled us to uncover the impact that we've been having on the planet, and then, crucially, develop innovative solutions to tackle it. So as the climate crisis worsens, what role does technology have in fighting back?
I think that's a right way to think about it. Most technologies, I would argue, depending on how it's used, can be good for society or can be misused for society. And we can talk about so many technology breakthroughs that actually can play both roles depending on how it's used and how it's governed and regulated. The thing that at the core, I would say, in today's technology revolution, it's really how can you use data to build insights that drives better action? And how do you do that in a much more real-time fashion? That's where the world is going. That's where we see society and businesses going. And if you apply that in the realm of climate change, in the realm of the topic we're talking about, I can gravitate to, if equipment allows you to run them far more carbon efficiently, just within the way it is, without making too many radical changes, while radical change comes through, then we can get, if, for example, you can run a power plant more efficiently, if you can run an aircraft engine more efficiently, you can reduce carbon emission by 20, 30, 40%, if done in a sustained, scalable way.
If I could come to you here, Lord Turner, people, governments and businesses are obviously the three key sets of individuals who can do anything about climate change. And when we focus on the third of those, businesses, many businesses taking steps to reduce their impact on the planet, which is great to hear. But admittedly, many others aren't yet. How do we ensure that businesses do more to fight climate breakdown?
Well, look, we need a lot of action to come from businesses. Those are the ones that drive innovation, make the actual investments. But to different degrees in different sectors of the economy, you also need a clear framework set by government. And that framework differs between those sectors where decarbonisation ultimately won't cost us anything, but we want it faster, and those where it will cost us. In the first category is electrification of road transport. That is going to be a cheaper way of producing road transport in future. Within the next 5 or 10 years, electric vehicles will be cheaper to buy upfront as well as cheaper to run. But we want that revolution, that move towards EVs to occur even faster than it would occur just driven by the market. And that's why things like bans on sales of new internal combustion engines. The UK now has one at 2030. I think all rich developed economies should set a target of 2035 or earlier. They bring forward and accelerate a change which is bound to occur technologically in any case.
A third of the UK's biggest companies are committed to net zero by 2050. Do you think that's going far enough?
We've seen a massive acceleration of the orientation towards net zero. We launched the Race to Zero a year ago. There's over 4,500 businesses, investors, and cities in now. So as Adair says, it's still not enough. Even 45% is still not enough, but that's changing very fast. And I would add, you talked about people, governments, and businesses. I would add a rather important group of investors. The finance community has a huge role to play here. And we launched the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero just a few months ago, and already over 170 asset owners, that's pension funds and insurers, asset managers and banks, with between them over $70 trillion of assets and balance sheet, have committed to the race to zero as well. So that's going to change. That's going to put pressure on the companies who haven't yet committed, because they're going to want access to capital and access to bank loans.
Nigel, for brands who want to action sustainability, who are sort of thinking about it now, who don't want to miss out, what resources, what guidance do they have? Certainly from a policy level, what can they rely on that will help them?
Well, first thing I'd say is just beware the framing of like this as a sustainability issue. And if you're a car company, it's not a sustainability issue about how you transition to electric vehicles. It's a survival issue. And if you're a steel company, it's a sustainability issue because those car companies are committing to net zero cars, which means they need net zero steel. So it's not a nice to have sort of fluffy issue. It's hard and center strategic economic survival issue for companies and countries. I mean, there's things that those companies can do. I mean, they can make that commitment. We call it the race to zero. They can look at things like the very clear pathways that the Energy Transitions Commission and the broader Mission Possible platform that they've launched with others are laying out. And they can call for clear policy as well. You know, when the UK was consulting on whether to move the combustion engine ban forward from 2040 to 2032 or 2035, I think that Adair, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I think you called for that to be 2030. I think We Mean Business, which I used to call for it to be 2030. And interestingly, Shell, right, an energy company which produces oil, so which has a vested interest in people burning oil in the form of petrol in cars, also called for 2030.
Tycho, I'm just wondering, what is the sense you're getting about how this will definitively deliver a more sustainable future? Do you believe that these promises will be kept, that pledges will be made accountable, that business will make this shift and it will have that tangible impact?
I am an optimist. I think it'll make sustainable difference. I think the flywheel has started. And once the flywheel starts on topics like these, the flywheel just accelerates. One of the reasons that we haven't touched upon is, in an enterprise like ours where we have 100,000 people across the globe, and we hire 20,000 people a year, and a number of the people we hire of the age group are 25 to 35. There is no question that the top three things they talk to us about in deciding whether they want to join a company like us is our position on sustainability, our position on ESG, our stated position, our walk the talk, and so on. So, as an enterprise that is basically there to attract talent, if we don't make a difference, then I think we are toast.
Nigel, do you agree with that? Do you sense it's coming? Is there a momentum here?
Yeah, I mean, I really largely share that. I think that, and I'm glad Tiger mentioned this sort of the war for talent, and I hear that from CEOs all around the world. It's like, if we don't get our act together on this stuff, people just don't want to work for us. So that's a result of societal shifts and youth campaigning and better education. I mean, if you're a smart 15-year-old and you're learning science and you learn all about climate change, it's kind of normal to say, what the hell have people been doing for the last 30 years? We've known about this, and maybe initially to get angry and then say, okay, what I'm going to do about it is it's a great time to become an engineer, right? The world is going to be looking to engineers like never before. But I think there's also the accountability mechanisms are starting to kick in. We're investors and policymakers setting the policies and investors driving for more ambition, and then citizens and civil society. We've recently had some really, I think, groundbreaking court decisions. Young people helped by environmental activists and sort of professional earth lawyers. There's a great NGO called Client Earth amongst them, taking governments and businesses to court. The government of Germany lost a court case. They're now committed to net zero 2045. Shell lost a court case. The court said you've got to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030.
Yeah, it all feels like the tectonic plates are shifting, doesn't it? The power of the people, those little milestones, those little moments, they all seem to be adding up and creating that momentum that I alluded to. And I think something else that might well do that is COP26. We know that it's taking place in Glasgow later this year. It's a huge year for UK climate action, Nigel. So how can companies prepare and ensure action before, during, and after these two crucial weeks?
Well, I think honestly, the first thing to do is to join the race. Just announce that you are committed to getting to zero, and then do the hard work of then coming up with your plan of what you're doing in the next 5-10 years. Right? You can't just announce that CEO 6 down the line is going to do. I mean, Tiger saying what what his company's going to do in 2050 is not very credible. Saying what he's going to do by 2025 is on his watch, right? So that's the first thing, is make that commitment. Second thing I would say is look to the kind of collaborative initiatives which Adair's work at the Energy Transition Commission has led to. And a lot of them are under the umbrella of the Mission Possible platform. There are others in other sectors, because there's a case for pre-competitive collaboration, like we see in telephony, right, where we're moving from 4G to 5G, 6G is already being defined, 7G is being defined, but there's still competition. It's not like non-competitive, but you can go much faster as a sector.
We've got time for one more question from the audience, which comes from Maz in Bournemouth, and I'd like to send this one your way, Lord Turner. It says this: do you think global net zero targets from governments and businesses are ambitious enough? And how do we ensure those don't serve as an excuse for inaction? I think Nigel's talked to that to a point. You don't want CEO number 6 down the line to have to deal with it because, ultimately you've set it so far in the future. But what would you say in answer to that question from Maz?
I would say there's been a great step forward over the last 2 years in companies and countries committing to net zero by 2050. And although you could argue, well, maybe it would be better in 2045 than 2050, I don't think that's the big issue now. I think the big issue is how do we get big reductions in the 2020s? Because there's a danger that we say it's 2050, but all the heavy lifting is going to occur in the 2030s or 2040s. Actually, what we need to do is aim to try to get emissions down, ideally by certainly 35, 40, ideally by 50% in the 2020s.
Gents, I'm afraid we've run out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. But Lord Turner, Nigel and Tiger, thank you so much for your thoughts on how business and tech can really make a contribution in the race against climate change. Hopefully many watching this today will be heeding that advice and play their own part too. Gemma, back to you.
Earlier, David caught up with Patricia Espinosa, who's currently serving as the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Here, they discuss the current state of the climate and the urgent need for global solutions. So let's head over to their conversation to hear more.
Really looking forward to this next conversation with someone who has shown true leadership and utter commitment in this space. She is a fine figurehead and someone who really the whole world of sport can learn from as we try and inspire everyone in this huge area of interest that we have to play their part, be it to reduce their own carbon footprint or to engage their fans and followers to take on the climate emergency. It's fantastic to have her as part of Race Against Climate Change Live. It is a huge privilege for me and indeed for Envision Virgin Racing to give a very warm welcome to Patricia Espinosa, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, a post that she's held for 5 years now. Patricia, great to have you with us. Thank you so much. And first of all, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your background, your journey to becoming the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
So when it was time to go to university, I chose international studies. I was hesitant about law or international studies, went for international studies. And then I was very, very lucky. I got into the Foreign Service of Mexico, and I had a wonderful career that took me, after more than 30 years, to become the foreign minister of my country. And in that capacity, in 2010, the president of Mexico asked me to take over the responsibility of presiding over the Conference of the Parties, the COP16. This is exactly 10 years ago, 11, in fact, because we didn't have, we were not able to meet last year. This was in 2010. And this was a very, very difficult conference because it took place just after Copenhagen, where no result was achieved. So I dedicated the whole year to build up trust between the parties. Already really over 180 parties to the convention, and rebuilding trust was, for me, very clear from the very beginning, the most important issue. I would say that created a good basis for us to come out of Cancun with a very positive package that, in the eyes of many, laid the ground for the Paris Agreement. Later on, when the vacancy for this position of executive secretary opened, I was asked. I received calls and messages from friends and colleagues saying, you should run, you should express interest. And after some discussion with my family, I did express my interest, and here I am.
Some journey, the experiences you've had, Patricia, the relationships you've been able to build and shape over that time. And I wonder, with that in mind, over that journey that you've just described to us so lucidly, how have you seen different countries change in their approach towards the climate emergency, and how has our communication on this subject changed?
Say that currently there are many more national leaders that understand really the urgency of climate change. When I began, and especially in 2010, when I started to be fully involved in the negotiations on climate change, there was really a lot of questioning about, is this true? Do I really need to change? And today, I think we are beyond that. And the science has been very helpful in bringing forward more and more information and very, very clear evidence of climate change. If we look at what has been happening just recently, for example, in Canada, in the United States, it is very evident. I also want to highlight that the whole issue of environment and the necessity to protect our planet started really in the late 80s and 90s. After the country started to look at issues like acid rain, pollution, the ozone layer. And at that time, I have to say, there was these issues were not seen as political. We can see that even very conservative leaders like Richard Nixon, Margaret Thatcher, were proponents of environmental and climate action. They saw a link between progress and protection, which was not the case later on. The Rio conference was the moment when things really kicked off at an official level with respect to climate change. And this momentum carried on when we got the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. I have to say that never in this journey have things been easy. In fact, multilateralism is really a very, very difficult process. And sometimes we have had big successes, and sometimes we have also had some big downs in the climate negotiations. But what's the big difference between what happened before and now? The big difference is the urgency. The fact that we are confronted every day with destruction and suffering. Look at the cases, for example, of people living in the islands that are literally sinking their homes beneath the waves, or indigenous peoples who have lost their traditional land due to melting permafrost. This sense of urgency is also matched by the reality that the window of opportunity to really be able to still do something about it is closing. We don't know exactly when, but we know that it's going to be very soon. In fact, there was recently a report by the World Meteorological Organization saying that in the next 5 years, there's a 40% probability that we will be reaching the 1.5 degree threshold, at least temporarily. So this already indicates that we're really, really running out of time. Now, we have clarity on the road forward. The Paris Agreement is very clear. We need to achieve a 45% reduction in emissions by 2030, at least, and by 2050, we need to reach net zero. The other important point to underline, we cannot keep setting targets and not fulfill our past promises. And so at COP26, it is also about completing the work that has been put on the table before this year to get to full implementation, get the process moving forward, and really comply everyone with the commitments that we have made until now.
We're 6 years on from that now, Patricia. So how are we doing? What are the biggest barriers that remain? And how do we overcome them to reach those goals?
So I think that the biggest barrier has always been the ability to think beyond ourselves, beyond our countries, to instead think on behalf of the planet and the humanity on the planet. To not think about our generation, but the future generations. Not think about this political cycle, but the future of society. And in this sense, it's important that we really acknowledge that what we are doing here, or what this is about, is the future of the planet, and that we cannot gamble with that we have to overcome political divisions. We need to come together to address the biggest challenge that we have ever collectively faced.
You mentioned COP26 there, Patricia. It's coming up later this year in Glasgow, and the urgency is such that's going to be upon us before we know it. But what would a successful conference mean in real terms? How do we make the most of this huge opportunity?
Well, first of all, I would make the point that really the world has no alternative but to make COP26 a success. It is really a credibility test for the global efforts to address climate change. And if we look at the way that, for example, the youth have been really asking for more action, I would say that it is also a credibility test for many governments worldwide. So it is essential that we can see that there is the leadership, that there is the trust and the willingness necessary to keep the 1.5 degree climate goal under the Paris Agreement within reach. We need to reflect this desire of literally billions throughout the world.
But what about business, Patricia? I wonder, what is your read on the net zero targets that have already been set, and are they ambitious enough?
Well, as long as we still cannot see that we are really on the path towards the 1.5 degree, I'm afraid I need to say that we are not yet there, and therefore what has been put forward is not ambitious enough yet. But what is really very important is to understand that businesses need to play their part in this deep transformation that needs to take place. And businesses need to understand that this is not about taking additional costs. It's really about investing in their future. It's really about making better businesses. There are so many important examples of businesses, big and small, that have embraced this sustainability agenda, that have really made very systematic work in measuring their emissions looking at areas of opportunity for reducing them, and then looking for ways to invest in climate action. That is really something that is very clear, and everybody needs to understand this.
And the nexus between sport and e-mobility is exactly where we find ourselves at Envision Virgin Racing. And I wonder if I could talk to you on that theme as well. How big a role do you think that e-mobility will play in the decarbonisation of our world and the preservation of our natural world?
Well, it's definitely going to play a massive role. The massive ramp up of electromobility and other forms of clean technology is crucial for the world to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And we need to continue to invest in innovation and research and development. And this needs to be paired with an enormous scale up of sustainable energy to ensure that electric vehicles are increasingly powered by decarbonized electricity systems. This is also a very central element. In fact, as you know, almost a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are coming from transport, and this has an obvious impact. So by working to lessen that impact, we can make enormous progress. This is a very good example, actually, of how tipping points work. For a long time, the issue of electrification of vehicles sort of existed in the background. Then, after the early adopters did their part and the cost started to go down and the major car companies got on board, the momentum was truly explosive.
Well, Patricia, we're almost at the end of our conversation, but I'm sure there are many who are watching this really inspired by your words and who are desperate to really make their own contribution. If you were to give one simple message to the audience, what would it be? How can they play their part in tackling the climate crisis?
Well, I would like to encourage every individual in your audience to make a contribution every day, to make a decision, a conscious decision every day that is intended to reduce their carbon footprint. And I would also like to encourage you to take up one challenge. And that challenge is to adopt net zero targets, because we really need all organizations in the sector to do so. So I'm not talking about general targets. I'm talking about targets with clear plan to achieve them and ways to measure progress along the way. And I do recognize that this is not going to be easy, but I think this is absolutely necessary.
Impactful note to finish on. Patricia, we really do appreciate you sparing the time from your busy schedule to be part of this event. Some fantastic take homes there. Great to hear from you. Some really inspirational things that we can reflect on. And if you'd like to keep the conversation going on social media, please do so. And please remember to use the hashtag Race Against Climate Change. Patricia Espinosa, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David.
Finally, in the Race Against Climate Change live event, we're going to hear from a selection of Envision Virgin Racing's partners as they come together to discuss how they're investing in a more sustainable future and how businesses can improve their own sustainability. So let's head back over to David as he welcomes three brilliant business minds.
Thanks again, Gemma. Well, Envision Virgin Racing like to partner with organisations with whom they share common values, who see this world the same way, who genuinely want to collaborate to make a better planet. And I think that this final panel will really speak to that point. Let's find out a little bit more about the partners and meet our brilliant panelists for this final session, which is entitled Why Brands of All Industries Need to Invest in a More Sustainable Future. First of all, we have Franz Jung, who is the chairman of the board for Envision Virgin Racing and VP of Envision Group, pioneering net zero solution partner. Ron Gerard, Chief EHS and Operations Officer at Johnson Matthey, a global leader in science who are enabling a cleaner and healthier world. We also have Tom de Weijer, who is the General Manager Materials Technology Centre at Teijin, who through their world-class expertise are making vehicles safer and more eco-friendly. I'm really excited to hear from you all. Thank you so much for being with us. Franz, we'll come to you in a moment, but I'd like to actually get the partner's perspective first of all. We'd really love to hear about your partnership with Envision Virgin Racing and why it makes so much sense as a synergy. So Ron, to you first for Johnson Matthey, the clearest link with Envision Virgin Racing is, of course, high performance electric battery materials. Talk to us about Elno and talk to us about your partnership with Envision Virgin Racing.
Developing science, as we've been doing for 200 plus years, which is all aiming towards, as you described before, a cleaner, healthier world. And working with a partner at the leading edge of technology enables us to ensure that the products that we're making will support the future mass markets that will exist for electric vehicles going forward. Our history is in science and particularly in metals chemistry. We've worked in the sort of nickelate chemistry for over 100 years. So we're a 200-year-old company.
Wow, 200 years. That is some heritage in the space, isn't it? And it's on to you, Teijin Aramid, that's been described as automotive's best kept secret. Just explain that and how it's so crucial for electric cars, and again why it's so worthwhile for Teijin to be in partnership with Envision Virgin Racing.
Yes, well, we're not 200 years, only 103 years as Teijin as a whole, but nevertheless, actually we started as a startup company more than 100 years ago and always working on materials. And indeed, one of the best kept secrets in Teijin is Teijin Aramid, which is a very versatile, lightweight material for many different application areas. We have been working on that already quite a long time, especially also on the lightweight elements, which are extremely important in all the applications. And since sustainability became such an important issue, it gave a completely new dimension to our materials and how we look at our own materials also.
Ron, I just wonder if you could tell me first about your own sustainability business journeys. We really get into the meat of this. What are the steps you've taken as an organisation to just simply become more sustainable?
Well, sustainability is really at the heart of the sort of business strategies that we actually have within JM. You look at the way that we apply our science. It's been to meet the challenges of society as time has moved on. For example, in the last 40 years, we've been supplying catalytic converters to improve air quality, and a third of all the vehicles in the world carry Johnson Matthey materials in their catalytic converters. So we've been applying that to improve air quality in the cities and countries around the world. And continue to do so. Now society's challenges have changed, and as some people have already observed, we are the first generation. The working generation today is the first generation who's really truly recognised the challenge of climate change.
Tom, the same question to you. How have you implemented sustainability? What's that journey been like? What steps have you taken at Teijin?
The need from the outside to innovate materials towards climate change, to reduce climate change, and so on, is very important. And I think it's a unique opportunity also to change within the company. We have to think differently. And I think the topic of sustainability is so big that not a single company can solve it by themselves.
Okay, so Franz, I mean, I should come to you really, because obviously, you've got these two great partners, and Envision Virgin Racing themselves bring plenty to the table, as do the Envision Group as a whole. Sustainability is absolutely in your DNA, isn't it? It's your lifeblood. Just tell us a little bit more about that picture as a whole.
Well, Envision is not as old as our partners' companies, so we are not even 20 years on business, but still or already leader in China and outside China in sustainability projects like wind energy. We are also focusing on EV battery technology. I'm coming later to this a little bit more in detail. We are master in charging, and we are also having a software developed, which we call Energy Operating System, ENOS.
But how can brands make best use of their voice to amplify sustainability initiatives and use their platform for good?
It's very hard because to communicate this, because it's most of the time still B2B business. But there is opportunities. Take, for example, Formula E. Our Envision Virgin Racing team is participating quite successful within the Formula E circuit. And Envision's focus is mainly sustainability, smart energy, net zero partnership for companies that I mentioned, as I mentioned before.
I wonder, for people who haven't really grasped how they implement sustainability, what do you think are some of the barriers, the perceived barriers, shall we say, to organisers becoming more ethical or more sustainable, and how do you overcome them?
There's no doubt that the challenge is a great challenge, a significant challenge, and one that we need to work in partnerships with. I think these days companies need to think about ecosystems for solutions. Just take, for example, the electric battery and recycling. It's going to be very important that we have an ecosystem that ensures that these batteries that are being put into new vehicles in the coming years actually fulfill a full life in their first life, go on to be used perhaps in other ways, in a secondary way, perhaps as energy storage devices, and eventually they need to be brought back and recycled.
Tom, let me come to you on that. Why is it important that business does lead the way in terms of climate action?
It is foremost very much important because also the future of our companies really depend on it. I mean, last of all, it's also a very good business opportunity. But I agree with Ron that the challenges are extremely big. We have to also look internally. How we do our internal processes, how we can improve on sustainability internally. So it's a really big effort, also really like a mindset change. And it is very important that you be honest and scientific based on your own results.
And Franz, what would you say are the business benefits for brands and businesses who genuinely incorporate sustainable changes and innovations? If you were to meet another chairman of another big company and you were to try and give him the big sell and say, come on the journey with us, what would you say?
Well, you see, I think it's more the question what happens if you do not focus on this new development. Consumers are much more sensitive on buying products from whom those products are coming. What is the origin of the product? What is authentic of the company's corporate messaging about sustainability? And I'm afraid if you or as companies would not focus early enough, soon enough, and honest enough into that area, consumers will walk away.
And the big danger here, Tom, surely is greenwashing. Yes, you want to talk about your own business and how sustainable it is, but how can brands make sure that they avoid greenwashing when they're talking publicly about sustainability?
Well, we do a lot of LCA analysis, but we don't do it by ourselves. We do it always together with our customers. And we always try to certify the models that we make externally to have a very external validation to see to test the LCA that we are doing. So this is surely helping the customers, but we also it's again opportunity to interact in a different way with the customer. So that's one thing we do. I already mentioned the science-based targets where we committed to. That's a second one. And thirdly, in order to drive the investment internally towards cleaner solutions, we apply the internal carbon pricing as an additional tool to put a price tag on our CO2 emissions in the investment.
To come back to Ron here, and I mentioned this earlier in the chat, that Johnson Matthey have recently announced new sustainability goals and targets as part of a new sustainability strategy and a framework going net zero by 2040. It's some commitment. So how did you devise that, and how can you hold yourselves accountable to that?
Well, these are our third generation sustainability targets. So we're not new to setting targets and working towards them within Johnson Matthey. However, what we have been doing is looking at our overall business strategy, because sustainability starts out with the business strategy. You need to examine your own business strategy and see where that fits. And of course, sustainability is an enabler, it's a supporter, it's part of the rationale for what we are doing. Our long-term mission has been to create a cleaner, healthier world. And so it's really stemming from that, from the business strategy. We formed sustainability strategy, and that's been a collaboration with internal partners, with understanding the interests of our external stakeholders, and through sort of materiality reviews and so on. and bringing about through collaboration and through discussion and iteration.
So Franz, I'll just come to you for the last couple of questions. You know, those certifications, those marks, those pledges, those commitments, how do you feel that they are impacting the world of business as a whole? Do you feel that that is convincing more and more businesses to come on the journey with you? Are you seeing that change in your conversations with other chairmen and other people at C-suite level? Do you sense that attitude is now shifting?
I think over the last 2 years, this development has been improving almost every day. It feels like companies are on a race by when the companies want to be carbon neutral. One is saying 2025, the other one says I'm faster, and so on. The question will be how sustainable all those commitments are. The good news is that there's pressure coming from different sides towards the companies. One side for sure is the younger generation. They see this as a mega trend to help the world, to improve the world towards sustainability, green energy, and save the world, so to speak, save the planet. That is coming from a young, very powerful generation. On the other side, we see, of course, a lot of pressure coming from governments. And, if governments give you top-down targets, that helps quite a lot.
I'm sure there are many people watching this event today, Franz, who are hanging on your every word here. What advice would you give businesses who are looking to become more sustainable?
I think, first of all, I'm convinced it has to come top down from the CEO of each and every company who wants to do something in this area. If the top level is not engaged and 100% convinced that this is the right way to do, your company and your culture in the company will not follow you. So I think that is the strongest advice I can give. The second advice I would give is to be honest and realistic with your targets. It doesn't help you if you overpromise and underdeliver.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. I think, from Ron and Tom, great to hear about the notion of your partnership with Envision Virgin Racing and exactly how you guys are such good buddies, I suppose, in business and why that works so well. And also your sustainability journey and how it really is at the heart of everything you do. And Franz as well, thank you so much for your time and those nuggets of wisdom, particularly those bits of advice at the end to representing Envision Virgin Racing and indeed the Envision Group. I'm sure our audience will be making copious notes and writing all of that down so that they can put that to work in their own businesses. Gemma, back to you. A fascinating final panel there.
Wow, what a phenomenal set of conversations today. A huge, huge thank you to all our brilliant participants and panelists for taking part in these exciting discussions and sparking such important ideas. And a huge thank you to you for joining us too. We hope you've enjoyed our panel discussions and that we've left you feeling energized about the race against climate change. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please do get in touch on the Envision Virgin Racing social channels, tagging #RaceAgainstClimateChange. Well, that's a wrap from all of us here at Envision Virgin Racing. We hope to see you all again very soon. Goodbye.